for the rule of law. It is time to secure the border. A central issue of the president's 2006 campaign was the promise to build, quote, an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall, end quote. The administration is taking steps to fulfill that promise, and the Subcommittee on National Security is closely monitoring this process. The President issued an executive order on January 25th for the Department of Homeland Security to, quote, take all appropriate steps to immediately plan, design, and construct a physical wall along the southern border, end quote. On March 17th, the DHS issued 2 requests for proposals for prototype designs as a first step in fulfilling the requirements set forth in the executive order. DHS is expected to use these prototypes to inform actual construction. Now, border walls have seen success in recent years. President Trump has identified Israeli border security measures as a potential model for securing the U.S.-Mexico border. The construction of a security fence on the Israel-Sinai border cut illegal entries from over 16,500 in 2011 to just 43 in 2013 and 12 in 2014, a 99% decrease. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, remarked that President Trump is right. I built a wall along Israel's southern border. It stopped all illegal immigration. Great success, great idea. Now, do those who oppose building a wall dispute that success? Or is the reason they oppose building a wall precisely because they acknowledge its potential effectiveness at curbing illegal immigration? I think we have to figure that out. Recent media coverage has focused on the cost of building the wall, and obviously this is a legitimate issue. DHS has only just begun the procurement process, yet opponents of a secure border have resorted to employing exaggerated cost estimates about a border wall. For example, Senate Democrats recently issued a very flawed report claiming that the wall would cost $70 billion. Today's Democratic witness wrote in January, however, that a border wall would cost as much as $14 billion, which is obviously much different than the Senate Democrat estimate. And I think what they did was take the highest historical number they could find and multiply it by the total miles of the border, which I don't think anyone is suggesting is the way to do it. And other opponents of a secure border have parroted the sloppy back-of-the-napkin math that's meant to confuse the issue. And the American people deserve better than misinformation. The wall should be built in a fiscally responsible way, and there are a variety of creative ways, such as by using the seized assets of drug dealers to build it at little or no cost to the American taxpayer. At the same time, what is rarely discussed, but which needs serious inquiry, is whether securing the border will have a positive effect on American taxpayers at the local, state, and federal levels. And today we'll hear testimony from immigration expert Dr. Stephen Camarata on the significant burdens that illegal immigration and having an unsecured border can impose on U.S. taxpayers. Dr. Camarata estimates that if a border wall prevented between 160,000 to 200,000 illegal crossings, which is only about 10% of the expected crossings in the next decade, then the U.S. would realize between $12 and $15 billion in savings. That would effectively offset the cost of building the wall, even if you didn't use the seized drug assets. Of course, securing the border is more about dollars and cents. It's also about our government's duty to secure its borders, defend our sovereignty, and most importantly, protect our citizens. Illegal immigration has had significant human costs. Too many Americans have been robbed of loved ones through crimes committed by criminal aliens who should not have been allowed in this country to begin with. One of them is Mrs. Agnes Gibney, who lost her son, Ronald Da Silva, 15 years ago today. Ronald was murdered by a previously deported illegal immigrant with a long criminal record, and she herself is a legal immigrant from Hungary. Now, she did it the right way, and her son was taken from her by someone who had no right to be in our country. What makes this tragedy and others like it so painful is that Ronald's murder was preventable. Had the government simply done its job and maintained a secure border, the murderer would never have been able to enter our country, and Ronald would still be with us. Building a wall on the U.S.-Mexican border will not stop all illegal immigration, but it's a necessary first step and consistent with experiences in San Diego and Yuma. witnesses for being here today and for their testimony. And with that, I yield to sitting in for my friend.
A parent to violence, I can't imagine what it is like to be here to sit on this anniversary. So for your loss and your passion to see something's done about that, I'm very respectful in so much as we may have some differences. I understand, I think as best I can, of what's brought you here today and the earnest desire you have to see that, make sure that other parents will never be in the position you're in. Ms. Espinoza, from what I've read in your work similarly, not as dramatically perhaps, but more globally, as you've seen many, many cases. I very much respect your work and the ultimate desire that you have. And Mr. Judd, to you and your colleagues, great respect for the work that you do. I know when I was in the California legislature many times having conversation with our state law enforcement people about the border, the difficult jobs you do and the Department of Justice in California when they work with you on that. And the other two witnesses, thank you for being here. Let me just add to that, this crucial work we take is very serious. Again, it should be fact-based, looked at this issue so that we identify what measures will work, what the benefits would be, and what the cost would be to the taxpayers and all Americans. The wall that the President is proposing simply won't work, in my view and in others, and will divert resources away from the areas critical to protecting the health, safety, and security of Americans. Recently, Oversight Committee member Will Hurd, who represents a district covering 800 miles of the border, addressed his concerns with the President's plan. He wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post in which he called the wall, quote, the most expensive and least effective way to secure the border. He also wrote, quote, true border security demands a flexible, defense-in-depth strategy that includes a mix of personnel, technology, and changing tactics, all of which come at a lower price tag than a border wall. I'm in agreement with my
Well, we have no choice.
Who is going to pay for the wall? Who?
The wall is going to be paid for by Mexico.
Mexico is going to pay for the wall, and Mexico will pay for the wall.
Mexico is going to pay for it,
and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Who's going to pay for the wall? Who?
Do you believe that Mexico will pay for it? No.
He's obviously talking about having Mexico pay for it. Do you think that's actually a viable option?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When announcing his presidential bid, the President stated, and I Great Wall, and nobody builds walls better than me. Believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively. I will build a great wall on our southern border, and I'll have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words. End of quotes. At the February 2016 campaign rally, the President reiterated, we will build a great wall along our southern border, and Mexico will pay for that wall 100%. Of course, these are only a few of the countless times the President has overpromised and underdelivered for the American people. Now, less than 100 days into his presidency, he has completely abandoned this promise and changed his tune. Earlier this week, President Trump tweeted that Mexico will pay for the wall, quote, eventually and in some form. With his track record, nobody should believe that. Instead, he is demanding that American families have the burden of finding additional billions of dollars to build this wall. Until earlier this week, he was signaling that he would be willing to shut down the government to get the leverage to take this money out of the wallets of hardworking American families. We have real problems to address in securing our borders, we all agree. But the President's proposed border wall does nothing or very little to advance our national security. Not only should it not be built, but it absolutely should not be built on the backs of hardworking American families. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Stephen Camerata, PhD, Director of Research, Center for Immigration Studies, Mr. Brandon Judd, President, National Border Patrol Council, Ms. Maria Espinosa, Director, the Remembrance Project, Ms. Agnes Gibney, mother of Ronald Da Silva, who was killed by an illegal immigrant 15 years ago today, and Mr. Seth Stoddard, former Assistant Secretary for Border, Immigration, and Trade Policy, Department of Homeland Security. Glad you were able to get here. Welcome to you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so if you could all please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. All witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made a part of the record. Mr. Camerata, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to thank the chair and the committee for inviting me. My name is Stephen Camerata, and I am Director of Research at the Center for Immigration Studies. My testimony today is based on a recent report published by the Center. This analysis reports the fiscal costs of illegal border crossers based on some fiscal estimates developed by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine earlier this year, or I should say last year, for immigrants by education level. These calculations are based on some pretty well-established facts about illegal immigrants. First, there is agreement that illegal immigrants overwhelmingly have modest levels of education. The vast majority either didn't graduate high school in their home country or have only the equivalent of a high school education. There is also agreement that immigrants who come to America with modest levels of education, regardless of legal status, create more in cost for government than they pay in taxes. Now, taking the likely education level of illegal border crossers and combining them with the net fiscal estimates from that National Academy studies shows that on balance, if you take all the taxes that they're likely to pay in their lifetime, given their education levels, and all the services and costs they create, there's a net drain on taxpayers of about $75,000 per illegal border crosser, or about $7.5 billion per 100,000 illegal border crosser. This figure is only for the original illegal immigrant. It doesn't count their descendants. We can do that. That's also in the study from the academies. If we apply those estimates, then the cost would rise to about $94 billion per illegal immigrant and their descendants, or about $9.4 billion per 100,000. Now, to be clear, the fiscal costs of illegal immigrants is not due to the fact that they don't want to work. It's not even due to the fact that many work off the books. Rather, it reflects their educational attainment. In the modern American economy, people with this skill profile, native-born immigrant or legal immigrant or illegal immigrant, pay less in taxes than they use in services. There's pretty much absolute agreement on that. Now, what these cost estimates do is give us an idea not only of what illegal border crossers cost, but they let us evaluate the likely savings that different enforcement strategies create for taxpayers versus what these enforcement strategies might cost. So, for example, a newly released study by the Institute for Dissent Analysis indicates that perhaps 1.7 million new illegal immigrants will successfully cross our border in the next 10 years. Now, if that's the case, and no one knows what the future holds, of course, but if that were to happen, and given these costs, it means that if we were to stop just 9 to 12% of those expected crossers over the next decade, it would generate $12 to $15 billion in savings, which might be enough to pay for a wall. In effect, the wall could pay for itself, even if it only kept out a small fraction of the people expected to come. Now, recently, the Cato Institute evaluated my analysis, and they argued that the illegal immigrants were as I thought they were, based on my analysis of the data. But even so, they still found that the average illegal border crosser would pay creates a fiscal deficit of $43,000, or $4.3 billion per 100,000 illegal crosser. Now, Cato in their analysis also tries to argue that state and local government costs, which are in the National Academy studies, shouldn't count because it's the federal government that's building the wall. Now, this argument doesn't make sense to me, but ultimately that's up to Congress, whether to count the state and local costs. But it seems reasonable to me to do so. Now, finally, I just want to make one more point about the costs that come from the national academies. They employ a concept called net present value, which calculates the fiscal impact. But this concept, which is commonly used by economists, has the effect of reducing the size of the drain that unskilled immigrants will create because it discounts the costs in the future. If you didn't do that discounting, the costs are much higher, about roughly double, about $150,000. So if you want to do a different calculation where you don't discount the future, that's what you would get. But the bottom line from this analysis is that unskilled immigration, which characterizes most illegal immigration, is very costly to taxpayers given their education and given the realities of the modern American economy that pays the less educated relatively low wages, coupled with the existence of a large and well-developed administrative state. It's not, the fiscal cost they create is not a moral defect on their part. It's simply the reality of education. Thank you for allowing me to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Now recognize Mr. Judd for 5 minutes.
Chairman DeSantis, Congressman Desaulniers, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I want to emphasize first off, I will not advocate for 2,000 miles worth of border. That's just not necessary. But what I will advocate for is a border wall in strategic locations which helps us secure the border. I want to point out what happened and give you a historical analysis of why the border is unsecure today. In the mid-'80s, the United States faced its first illegal immigration crisis. The Border Patrol had approximately 4,000 agents who were charged with patrolling nearly 2,000 miles of United States-Mexico international border. Other than barbed wire fences owned by ranchers, there were no vehicle or pedestrian barriers to impede illegal border crossers. The Border Patrol was overwhelmed, and Congress chose to deal with the influx of illegal aliens entering the United States by passing the Immigration and Reform Act of 1986. The act promised to secure the border and ensure the United States was never put in the same situation again. The act failed. It failed in large part because the United States government put the cart before the horse. Without securing the border first, the government legalized several million persons who willfully violated U.S. law. By so doing, we broadcast a clear message to the world that our laws could be made void if enough people entered the country illegally. The message was heard worldwide, and illegal immigration exploded. After IRCA of '86, illegal border crossings in high numbers took place almost exclusively in San Diego, California, and El Paso, Texas. The Border Patrol thought if it could control these two corridors, they would be able to control illegal immigration and narcotic smuggling. They threw the vast majority of their resources at these areas, but left other areas like the El Centro, California, the Yuma, Arizona, and the Tucson, Arizona Border Patrol sectors wide open. The prevailing thought was that the infrastructure did not exist on either side of the border to allow smuggling organizations to move their operations to the inhospitable and barren deserts areas of Arizona. The prevailing thought was wrong. For more than 10 years, the Tucson Border Patrol sector was overrun because we did not have the foresight to realize that smuggling is big business and that the cartels are extremely flexible and adaptable. In essence, we created the problem in Tucson, and the citizens and ranchers paid for our mistakes. Unlike today, in the mid-'80s and early '90s, ISIS didn't exist, criminal cartels didn't control every facet of illegal activity on the border, and transnational gangs weren't prevalent in the United States. Today, however, this is our reality. And if we refuse to learn from failed border security policy and operations of the past, we will never secure the border. We must take a proactive approach, and it must start with the proper mix of technology, infrastructure, and manpower, and it must be comprehensive. We must acknowledge that shutting down the Rio Grande Valley sector without addressing Laredo, Del Rio, and Big Bend will just create the same type of vacuum that we created in Arizona. Part of the proper infrastructure, the wall, is being heavily debated, and as an agent who worked in two of the busiest sectors in the history of the Border Patrol, I can personally tell you how effective border barriers are. When I got to the Tucson sector, we had next to nothing by way of infrastructure, and I can confidently say that for every illegal border crosser that I apprehended, 3 got away. The building of barriers and large fences, a bipartisan effort, allowed agents in part to dictate where illegal crossings took place, and doubled how effective I was able to be in apprehending illegal border crossers. As an agent who has extensive experience working with and without border barriers, and as the person elected to represent rank-and-file Border Patrol agents, I can personally attest to how effective a wall in strategic locations will be. I implore both sides of the aisle to quit politicizing border security and illegal border entries, and work with the men and women of the United States Border Patrol by providing the proper technology, infrastructure, and manpower. By so doing, Border Patrol agents will secure the border. I appreciate your time and look forward to answering all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Ms. Espinosa, you're up for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, I am honored to be here before you today to testify on issues associated with national security. My name is Maria Espinosa. My testimony is based upon my nearly 8 years of traveling across the country with the Remembrance Project, an organization that advocates for those families, our country's previously most forgotten, whose loved ones were killed by illegal aliens. My testimony is designed to assist you and others to understand the urgency of the immediate need to secure our country. Americans will continue to be under assault until the wall is built and the border secured. I have attended murder trials, criminal and civil hearings, testified in other states, and participated in roundtables, discussions with sheriffs. I have made presentations and have spoken with groups all over the United States about the most devastating of all impacts of illegal immigration, the loss of a life. I have had hundreds of first-hand experiences with many stolen lives, families. For nearly 20 years, families of Americans slain by illegal aliens have given heart-wrenching congressional testimony, like the one you're about to hear from Mrs. Gibney, about the tragic and violent killings of loved ones perpetrated by someone who should not have been in the country in the first place. The irony, while it seemed as though the politicians listened and even publicly gave the families their condolences, congressional leadership, the bodies of both houses, Democrat and Republican, have failed to enact the very measures that would have saved American lives. America has spoken. We want the wall built right away. Today, I speak on behalf of the Remembrance Project Advocacy Incorporated, where we proudly support our president and an American-first national agenda. The wall is a foundation upon which a comprehensive border policy can and must be built. It is of the utmost urgency. First, for a future perspective on the horrors of a national open borders policy, let's look at Texas over the past 6 years. According to Department of Homeland Security status indicators, over 217,000 criminal aliens have been booked into local Texas jails between 2011 and 2017. Committing nearly 600,000 crimes, ranging from assault, of which there were nearly 70,000, to over 6,000 violent sexual assaults of women and children, and homicides, which numbered nearly 1,200, all preventable. These are only a sampling of the heinous crimes they have committed. Department of Homeland Security reports that a full 2 out of 3 of these crimes were committed by aliens here illegally. Those who falsely state that a great border wall would not work either don't know their history or are in denial. To those border wall naysayers, doubters, and deniers, I can assure you that a wall will work. Today, where walls exist on our own southern border, illegal crossings have been drastically reduced by over 94%. In the Arizona's Yuma sector, arrests of illegal alien crossings dwindled from over 138,000 to just over 8,300. The known attempts to enter and those who escaped dwindled to an equally minimal number compared to the hundreds of thousands who entered and evaded arrest in previous years. Yes, your honorable committee and men and women, walls do work. To falter now has dire future consequences to Americans and America's future. If not built when another open borders president is elected, the technological deterrence and all-important army of border agents will be reduced or entirely removed, allowing this Holocaust of American killings to resume. This unwise policy must not be allowed to be perpetrated upon our families. Based upon preliminary information, we believe that the American stolen lives may number in the tens of thousands. But because the government at every level has previously failed to identify correctly the illegal alien killers, no one knows for sure. We welcome Congress's commitment to assure an accurate accounting and believe that all Americans, if they knew the true human cost of this invasion, would demand the wall be built immediately. Just last month, there was a string of reports of heinous crimes committed by illegal alien gang members. The Remembrance Project advocacy stands behind President Trump with the American people in demanding that Congress immediately fund the construction of the wall. All of you here today and all of Congress bear a duty not just to your constituents but to all Americans to preserve our sovereign nation and keep our communities safe by first and foremost securing our borders. I ask you to do all you can to stop these preventable killings and murders that permanently separate families from their loved ones. Please, not one more stolen lives. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you. Ms. Gibney, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Agnes Gibney. I was born in Budapest, Hungary. I was 2 when my family left in January of 1957 as refugees. We immigrated to Brazil, where we lived for 13 years, legally trying to apply to come to the United States. My parents, my brother, and myself legally immigrated to the United States. We followed all the rules, the laws. We followed all the background investigation, thorough background investigation, and thorough medical exams by American consulate appointed and approved doctors. We also had to have character witnesses attesting that we had good moral standing, and my father was required to have a job contract. Today, April 27, marks my son Ronald da Silva's 15th anniversary of his murder. Ronald was my firstborn, my only son. His father, my first husband, was a Brazilian national. Ronald was a good person, kind, considerate, respectful, loving, funny, and sometimes a practical joker. He helped my parents, and Ronald was a good big brother to his 2 sisters. He was always there when anyone needed his help. Ronald went to visit his 2 children, Matthew and Marcel, and while standing on the driveway, he was shot, a bullet that was intended for someone else. The shooter, the murderer, was an illegal alien with a long criminal record who had been previously deported. Immediately after the shooting, he fled to Mexico. His wife was depositing her welfare check at the credit union so he could withdraw it in Tijuana so he could live on. He eventually returned to the United States and was sent to prison. He's due to be released in 2 years and 7 months. I am afraid that California won't notify ICE of his pending release. It took me almost 11 years to find out he had an ICE hold. If our borders would have been secured, Ronald would still be here, along with thousands of innocent victims killed by illegal aliens. Many criminal illegal aliens deported return to our unsecured borders to continue victimizing American citizens. One life lost is one too many. We need a barrier, we need a wall, and more Border Patrol officers to protect us all. Ronald's murder devastated my family. My only sibling, my brother Laszlo, had a massive stroke at age 51 due to the overwhelming stress and despair. He died the following day, only 4 months after Ronald was murdered. You see, my brother was married to my sister-in-law, who is from Mexico, and that devastated them. My father gave up living. He wanted to die, to be with Ronald, his first grandchild. It took him 11 years of suffering. My mother tried to be so hard and strong for me and the family. She was our rock, but I could see the incredible pain in her eyes. She too is in heaven now. They are together, my son, my brother, father, and mother. I have never seen my husband Mark, a highly educated man, retired deputy chief of El Monte PD, where my son was murdered, so helpless. Watching the devastation, the panic, the pain, there was nothing he could do to undo or fix what happened. He was the one to call me at the campground where I was camping with my 2 daughters with Girl Scouts to tell me that Ronald was shot in the shoulder and he was expected to survive. We immediately drove home. As I walked in the house, he hugged me and said, "I am sorry." I told him I was going to the hospital to be with Ronald, so when he came out of surgery, he wouldn't be alone. It was then that he said, "I'm sorry, Ronald didn't make it." Now I live a life sentence of pain and suffering, wondering what would Ronald look like. Would he have gray hair at age 44? Would he be married? What would he be doing? I miss his beautiful smile, his warm bear hugs, his sense of humor, our talks. I miss his voice, his scent. I miss family get-togethers with all of us present. My family is permanently broken and separated. I can't travel anywhere in the world to see him ever again. I will forever miss all the tomorrows and all that was taken from me, all because of broken, open borders. I miss watching him iron his clothes and spend a long time fixing his hair. But what I miss the most is him calling me Mommy. I miss everything. I simply miss my son. All I have left are his clothes, old photos, baby shoes, baby bottles, some toys and memories. I live with this emptiness, a hole in my heart, longing for my son. And I live with a daily fear of losing another child or family member. We cannot afford to lose one more life. Ronald is just one life. His death is not an isolated case. Deputy David March murdered a couple of days after Ronald in a neighboring town. His murderer also fled to Mexico, and he also had been previously deported. His widow Terry and I became friends. We would compare our pain, our hurt, our grief, and often cry together. Officer Don Johnston, a co-worker of my husband, was shot by someone who overstayed his visa. He became paraplegic. He ultimately died of his injuries. Hundreds of victims, innocent lives. I wonder how many more are there that we don't know about because our government does not keep statistics on illegal aliens, crimes. What an overall problem it is for a nation that so many of U.S. citizens are killed on a daily basis by illegal aliens who shouldn't be in our country to begin with. When I became a U.S. citizen, the first president I voted for was President Ronald Reagan, who signed an amnesty bill which was supposed to be followed by securing our borders and enforcing immigration laws within our country, including verifying rights to employment. These things have never been done, and the conditions have gotten worse every year. The irony is, my family and I legally immigrated to the United States, and an illegal murdered my son, who should have never been in the country to begin with. I urge you to do what so many politicians have promised for years: a secure border, eliminate incentives for illegal aliens to come here, and enforcement of existing immigration laws. It is too late for my son Ronald and the thousands killed by illegal aliens, but there are so many lives that can be saved if you would just take action and put Americans first. Our President Donald Trump deserves more respect. He is working so hard to protect our country, protect our Constitution. Illegal aliens have no constitutional rights. A country without border is no country. You may say that it is inhumane to deport illegal aliens who didn't care about breaking our laws. How inhumane is it that my son Ronald and thousands of innocent victims' lives were cut short? It is the responsibility of the government to keep us safe, and our President Trump is working to accomplish that. Please do not stand in his way. Work with him. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.